Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:08 p.m. in what must be the darkest, most miserable, wettest, grayest, grimmest evening that there's been in a long time in Budapest. It's been raining nonstop now for a couple of days, and no one has seen the sun really for a long time. It's a deeply depressing, despondency inspiring weather. And it doesn't look like there's going to be any let up anytime soon. However, on a more upbeat note, welcome everybody who has joined me. Welcome everybody in the United States of America, on the East Coast of the United States, where it is now 3:09 p.m. And you are very fortunate to be the recipient of a visit by the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And before we get on to that, I mean, obviously, there's a great deal to say. Um, uh, I want to first of all say a little bit about the death of Gene Hackman, which is obviously, I mean, sad in one sense that it's the passing of a obviously a major acting talent, but also a man who epitomized what was, I think, probably the last golden age of American cinema, the cinema of the 1970s, and he's very much associated with that. He was a phenomenally productive actor. He made a lot of movies, many very forgettable movies, and but he made some very good movies. I mean, he was in a way he was a character actor who became a star, which is unusual. So because in many of these movies he really wasn't the lead. I mean, some he obviously was the lead, but in many movies, many of his most notable movies, he wasn't the lead actor, and he didn't have the presence of a lead actor. You know, he wasn't particularly charismatic. He wasn't particularly handsome, um, but he had a definite a presence, and I think obviously he will be was very much associated with those great films of the early 1970s. Obviously, The French Connection, um, which was really an outstanding movie. I mean, it still holds up really well. I mean, it still captures the atmosphere of New York in a way that very few New York films have done, since, before or since. And then, of course, the Conversation, where he plays a very different part, which was a very dark, very rather frightening movie. Plays a very different part there. Again, he's a character actor, so he played a very different role there from Popeye Doyle. The circumstances of his death are quite peculiar. I mean, he and his wife and his dog were found dead. And then they say that the bodies were mummified. I'm not exactly sure what they mean by mummified. They say somehow the skin hadn't. They'd been dead for some time, so in other words, they'd obviously been dead for some days, but the skin hadn't begun decomposing as skin does. So I think that's what they mean by it. It's mummified. Why one of the dogs died, but they had two other dogs that they didn't die. I'm not sure, and we don't exactly know why the wife died. I mean, the wife is much younger than him. He was 95, obviously. I mean, that's rather old, but his wife was 63, so quite how she died. And there was early speculation there was maybe carbon monoxide poisoning, but I don't know what the evidence for that is. They say that they found some pills in the bathroom where her body lay, but I don't know. It's all at this stage. It's all at the level of speculation, but it's certainly a very unusual death, and I guess we'll find out about it. But I was thinking that it might be an idea for our next Monday night at the movies. We could do we could screen one of Hackman's movies. We don't have to do it for 2 weeks in the way we normally do. Like we have the winner and the runner-up, but this time what we could do is just simply do the winner. I mean, we've already shown a number of Hackman movies in our Monday night at the movies series, because we showed Unforgiven, in which he was outstanding as a sort of the somewhat demonic, but basically a decent sort, demonic but decent sheriff in Unforgiven. But we also screened The Conversation, and we also screened A Bridge Too Far. And Skeptic Spud says The Conversation would depress the cocaine addict. Yeah. I mean, but luckily we already screened it, so we don't have to screen it again. But it's if anyone wants to watch it, it's somewhere in the locals archive, so it's still there, so you can watch the Conversation. But we also screened, as I say, A Bridge Too Far, which I think is one of his worst performances. It's a good film, but his performance was lamentable. I mean, he couldn't get the Polish accent at all, which is just extraordinary. That somebody with training as an actor made such a hash of the Polish accent. But he also just didn't get. He just didn't come across as Polish. he just didn't. So that was part of it. I mean, the film itself was spoiled really by the obvious attempt to make a commercial appeal, to make it a commercial successful movie in the United States. So they brought in all kinds of big names in the American movies without really any need to do so. They had Robert Redford was in it, Elliot Gould was in it, James Caan was in it, Ryan O'Neal was in it, and there was really no need for it other than they were obviously trying to make money in the American market, and they presented the Americans, as is always happens whenever they have these joint British Americans in World War II type movies. They present the Americans as much more sympathetic than the British are. So the British, by and large, were shown to be unpleasant, nasty, very stiff, rather bitchy. Whereas the Americans were shown to be regular guys, good. They were actually the ones with the stiff upper lip, and it kind of reminded me of The Great Escape, which I've always thought was a very overrated film. I mean, so many people love The Great Escape. That was very overrated, but we don't have to get into that. But again, if you could recall The Great Escape, all of the Americans who escaped actually escaped to freedom. They all got out, all got away. Not one of the Americans was caught, or with the exception of Steve McQueen. And while he did get caught, but it was only after a long, prolonged, exciting motorcycle chase when they finally got him. And then they brought him in, and he got his gloves, his baseball gloves, and a ball, and boom, he's going to be doing his usual routine with the ball in solitary. So he was the only one of the Americans, but all the other Americans escaped. Whereas the British did not escape; they were arrested and they got shot for their troubles. So again, but somehow they wanted their audiences to like the Americans and not get too upset if the Americans were caught and then got shot. So that was the but again, in A Bridge Too Far, um, the Americans were they presented if you remember, the Elliot Gould character as a sort of cigar chomping daredevil colonel, and as opposed to um, Browning played by Dirk Bogarde, who was presented as really the villain of the whole thing. Very very nasty. Um, Browning was quite interesting because he was married to the great I don't know, great, the famous British writer Daphne du Maurier, and she really took objection to that movie because of the way Browning was presented, and my recollection. I mean, maybe I'm wrong now. I think there was some kind of a lawsuit. They made a lawsuit against the film because of the unfair presentation of Browning. But but I don't know how. I don't remember how it was settled. They certainly didn't get any changes in the film. But I did think that Browning was presented deliberately unsympathetically, as if everything was really his fault. But everything wasn't really his fault. I mean, the plan wasn't his. The plan was Montgomery's. But they didn't. The filmmakers didn't really want to go after Montgomery. Um, but they, but so that's why they went after Browning. But anyway, so so anyway. If people have suggestions for the which Hackman movies, we'll have a poll, the usual poll. So as things stand, we were going to run next Monday the runner up of the movies and business, which the winner was Wall Street. We screened Wall Street last Monday, and then next Monday probably we were going to screen Executive Suite. So we'll postpone that till the week after, and then we'll screen one of Hackman's movies. So keep in mind, we've already screened The Conversation. We've already screened Unforgiven, and we've already screened A Bridge Too Far. So any suggestions you have for which Hackman movies we can screen, then make sure you don't list one of those three. So anyway, now the other thing is, before we get on to Sokir, the other thing is, of course, this extraordinary event that took place. Well, a couple of things. With the Tofu for All. I like that. I like the Tofu for All. Bonnie and Clyde. I'm sure you hate it. It's not one of my favorite movies, but that's I think it's a reasonable suggestion, because I think I was my recollection is that he got an Oscar nomination for that. I mean, he's very young there, but I think he got an Oscar nomination for that. But again, it was not one of my favorite movies. But yeah, that's obviously obviously a very worthwhile suggestion. Anyway, so yesterday we had the two extraordinary events. We had the extraordinary event of the Bosnian Serb president, the president of the Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, getting convicted in court and sentenced to 1 year in prison, and a 5-year ban on political participation, for the crime, and because essentially his crime was defying the orders of the Office of the High Representative. which is this German Christian Schmidt, who is unelected, and who is not doesn't even have the imprimatur of the support of the UN Security Council. So it was back in the day when we had this awful, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY, was functioning, and however ghastly it was, and so absolute outrageous and unfair in its practices and its jurisprudence, there wasn't really very much one could do about it because it had the backing of the UN Security Council. I mean, the Russians incompetently in 1993 voted to support the establishment of the ICTY, and so from that moment on, whatever the ICTY did, including killing a number of the defendants who were in its prison in The Hague, including the great Slobodan Milosevic, who died, somewhat mysterious circumstances in that prison. There was nothing really you could do about it because it had the authority of the UN Security Council. Of course, it was completely bogus because the Russians could have at any time said, we're not going to support this anymore, we're not going to fund it anymore. Because even though the UN Security Council had established it, the UN Security Council could, I would assume, disestablish it at some point, but the Russians made no real effort to do so. So even when Milosevic died in 2006 at the ICTY, the Russians really didn't do anything very much other than complain. So therefore, but in this case, the Christian Schmidt, and as I said in the short podcast that I recorded yesterday, they always make sure that whoever occupies that position of the office of the High Representative is always either an Austrian or a German, because their task is to antagonize and offend the Serbs as much as possible, and the Austrians and the Germans are the ones that that really upset the Serbs, understandably so. I mean, they were attacked by the Austrians in 1914, and then they were attacked by the Germans in 1941. So, obviously that's a particular sore point. When they did that. Yeah, Marty says Eureka, Nicholas Roeg, 1983. That's a very good idea. I think I saw bits of it some years ago. I've never seen the whole of it, and I really want to see that. So that's, I think, a very good suggestion. It looked pretty interesting. Nicholas Roeg films are usually quite interesting. Finland Coyle says George is a type of genius. This is a man to whom I can listen to all day. That. Thank you so much. No relation. There's no relation between us. So, but anyway, this Christian Schmidt has taken it upon himself essentially to overturn laws of democratically elected bodies, legislators. Now, when you read the media, they always say, "Oh, yeah, that was because of the Dayton Accords." The Dayton Accords, that was the only way that they could get these mutually warring factions to work together, and the only way they could do it is through having this office of the High Representative. So that's why he was given all these powers. The office of the High Representative was never given those powers. It was in the Dayton Accords. The powers that he acquired came later through the Peace Implementation Council, and then they acquired these so-called bond powers. And so it was these bond powers that enabled them to start firing presidents and basically just sacking legislators. This was done by what was the name of the guy who was the Office of the High Representative? Paddy Ashdown, drunken fool, failed British politician. These type of positions are invariably go to these failed politicians. And then there was this guy, I think his name was Carlos Westendorp. These names don't mean anything to anyone because they're all from the past, and they're not exactly very distinguished figures. But Carlos Westendorp, I think he was the one who fired the Bosnian Serb president. I think it was 1998, Nikola Poplasen. And the interesting thing is that when he fired Nikola Poplasen, because and the crime of the Serbs is invariably that they don't distance themselves from Radovan Karadzic or Ratko Mladic, and they don't admit that they always have to admit that the Serbs committed genocide in Srebrenica. So by refusing to admit that they did that, that's a crime worthy of being fired from your job. The media, of course, just repeat this. Oh well, of course this was all agreed to at Dayton. No, it was not agreed to at Dayton. It's just like when they say that. But I would say that I should just say maybe I said it, but I should emphasize it that when Nikola Poplasen was fired as the president of the Republika Srpska in 1998, he was replaced by Milorad Dodik. At the time, Dodik was seen as pro-Western. He was seen as somebody much more in tune with Western desiderata. So now, when all these, Dodik, radical nationalist, he's this, fanatical Serb and whatever, ethno-nationalist, all the usual pejoratives that you get in the media. They kind of forget he was installed in power in 1998 and replaced, the guy who was then deemed to be the radical Serb nationalist, the unapologetic supporter of Karadzic and Mladic. So they, again, whenever Dodik says we're going to withdraw from the this joint army, the army of the army of Bosnia and Herzegovina, immediately in the media pipe, oh well, he's violating Dayton. The Dayton Accords said that there has to be a joint army. The Dayton Accords did not say that there was to be a joint army. Absolutely did not say. There was nothing in the Dayton Accords saying that there should be a joint army. That came later. They later created, it was around about 2004, in the heyday of NATO exuberance, after the bombing of Yugoslavia, that they created this joint army. But it wasn't envisaged under Dayton because they really couldn't bring these people together and say, oh, you're going to have a joint army, because otherwise they wouldn't. Dayton wouldn't work. The only way they could get Dayton to work was essentially that these two entities, the Republika Srpska and the Muslim Croat Federation, were really far apart. It was essentially a very loose, really loose confederation. Now, by doing that, by agreeing to that, the Western powers have been kicking themselves ever since. They were angry that they had allowed this to happen, because the war that broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1992 came about because Alija Izetbegovic had insisted on a unitary Bosnian state. So what had happened was that there was essentially the according to the bad inter this phony baloney bad inter arbitration commission said, well, if you hold, everybody can, all the republics of the former Yugoslavia can apply for independence, provided they hold some kind of a referendum. Now the problem was that the Serbs had no intention of taking any sort of part at all in an independence referendum. They said, fine, if you want to go down that path of having a referendum on independence, then we just don't want to have anything to do with Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so they essentially said, boom, we're out of here. And they walked out of the parliament. They held the referendum, but the Serbs boycotted the referendum. But the referendum was overwhelmingly in favor of independence, because the referendum only involved the Muslims and the Croats. Now the Croats basically saw it, the independence of Bosnia and Herzegovina as the first step towards joining Croatia. But what then happened was that essentially the West embarked on a policy of trying to create this fake state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, trying to force the Serbs, who didn't want to have anything to do with this state, force them into being a part of this state. So in fact, they took the exact opposite line from the one that they took in Serbia proper, which was to support independence in Kosovo, the Albanians who wanted to secede from Serbia. So there they supported secession, but in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they fought against secession. So they took exactly the opposite position. The only thing that was consistent was that in each case, they wanted to hurt and damage the Serbs as much as possible. They hurt and damaged the Serbs by essentially helping the Kosovo Albanians to secede, and then they wanted to hurt the Serbs by refusing to allow, their sovereign wish to join the Republic of Serbia. But what they finally settled on at Dayton was that there would be the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but it would only be as part of a very loose, really loose confederation. That wasn't really to the liking of the Americans and the Europeans, because they wanted a unitary state. They still want that unitary state. That's why they're constantly running into these problems with Republika Srpska, because they don't want any kind of unitary state. The one other thing which is kind of interesting, and it's interesting apropos of Ukraine, and that's why I find it a little tiresome. I mean, I think, look, Zelensky is an absolute toilet. He's a toilet person. I mean, he's a horrible, ghastly person. However, the issue of his legitimacy is really totally beside the point. And basically his term in office should have ended in May of 2024, and he's continuing. This is not a very strong argument. And the reason it's not a strong argument is it goes back to what happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Western powers in the media always treated Alija Izetbegovic as the president of Bosnia. He wasn't the president of Bosnia. He was the president of the presidency. So the way it was supposed to work is that the president of the presidency, there were three presidents, each one representing one of the three nations of Bosnia and Herzegovina: the Muslims, the Croats, and the Serbs. And one would whoever won in that community, he would serve for 1 year, and then he would make way for the representative of the other community. Now, the strange thing was that when they had the election in 1991, the winner among the Muslims was not Izetbegovic, but Fikret Abdic. So Fikret Abdic won, but it was Izetbegovic came in second. And But there was some kind of a deal made between Abdic and Izetbegovic, whereby Abdic stepped aside and allowed Izetbegovic to be to hold the Muslims' seat in the presidency. But either way, he was only supposed to hold it for 1 year. I mean, I would imagine they probably threatened the life of Abdic, and that's why Abdic stepped aside. They were just going to cut his throat if he insisted on being president. But in any case, Izetbegovic was supposed to only hold that position for 1 year, and then he would step aside, and somebody else would take over. But in fact, he never stepped aside. He just continued being president. And the media just repeat, "Oh, President Izetbegovic, oh, president, president, president." And he was the one who signed on behalf of the Muslims at Dayton. 3 years after he was supposed to have stepped aside, and no one really cared very much. And so I think that the whole thing of legitimacy, or you're not, you don't have the authority. Izetbegovic had no authority at all to sign on behalf of anyone. But anyway, for the Western powers, this was work that has not been completed, and they continue to press for the centralization, essentially the reunification of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to push this into NATO and to push it into the European Union. Because as things stand, the only countries in Europe that are not members of NATO, leaving aside Russia, are Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia and Austria. Now, Austria, it's bound by that treaty, the 1955 neutrality treaty. I'm sure NATO couldn't get around it. They probably will at some point. But the Western powers are really pissed off with the Serbs, so they keep putting this pressure on Bosnia and Herzegovina, and all the pressure is coming against the Serbs. And so you have this character, Christian Schmidt, who just simply overturns rulings by the parliament in Banja Luka. And the parliament in Banja Luka says that Christian Schmidt has no authority. He's not legally the office of the High Representative. Basically, because he doesn't have the backing of the UN Security Council. So Christian Schmidt simply overturned that decision by the Bosnian Serb parliament, and they in turn just simply overturned his decision. So that's a criminal matter. So boom, boom, boom. They start. They launch this prosecution of Milorad Dodik, and now Dodik has been convicted, and now he's saying, well, the Bosnia and Herzegovina is no more. Now, he's threatened to secede many times in the past, and he hasn't yet done so. I don't think he's going to do it. However, I do think that if you're going to do it, this is probably the best time to do it. I mean, NATO is very preoccupied. He's got his hands full in Ukraine. It really wouldn't be able to devote too much attention to a major operation against the Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So again, I don't think Dodik is going to do anything because he's threatened to do things in the past. But this isn't a bad time to do it. Now, so that's that, and then of course we had the opening of this investigation into Georgescu. Now the thing about Georgescu, the Kylin Georgescu, the Romanian uh, candidate, was that it was always obvious that this was going to happen once um, the constitutional court in Romania stepped in and cancelled an election, but was unable really to come up with any plausible um, explanation for why they were canceling the election, other than Georgescu was going to win in the second round. And then so they came up with this convoluted explanation. Oh, there was a TikTok campaign and the Russians were behind this. But the problem is that they couldn't come up with any evidence that the Russians were behind this. I mean, even the New York Times has admitted that there's really no evidence that the Russians were behind it. In fact, the evidence suggests that it was one of the rival parties that did this in order to hurt. It was a kind of the liberal party, a liberal party in Romania. In order to hurt the conservatives, they boosted the TikTok presence of Georgescu. So it had nothing to do with the Russians. But anyway, once they did this, they canceled it because he was going to win. Georgescu was going to win. He was clearly well ahead in the polls. And in fact, the voting for the second round had already begun. So they canceled it, but they had to hold new elections, and they came up with a new date of May. But there's no question he's going to win this election. So the only way they can stop his winning an election is by launching some kind of a fake, phony investigation. So I was looking through the stories about what the what exactly is he being accused of, and it's very hard to get any clear explanation for this. So here's from Euronews. Romanian prosecutors charged Georgescu on 6 counts in criminal case rocking the country. And so they have here the Romanian ultranationalist politicians was picked up by police for questioning earlier on Wednesday regarding false funding sources and false information. And then prosecutors in Romania have opened criminal proceedings against the ultranational, blah, blah. And then the charges also revolve around his support for sympathizers of the Iron Guard, a pre-World War II fascist and anti-Semitic movement and political party, which is illegal under Romanian law. Now, this is very strange. You're going back to Antonescu, the sort of the Romanian dictator, pre-World War II dictator. So you're going back to events from 90 years ago. You're prosecuting him now. What the hell does he have to do with Antonescu and the Romanian Iron Guard? And then he goes on here that the prosecutors questioned Georgescu as part of an investigation reportedly looking into zero expenses declared by Georgescu. And then it says, anyway, that's the same that. It says Georgescu was on his way to file his candidacy for the presidency when he was stopped in traffic, and then he says Georgescu's questioning is part of a nationwide police action that also involves raids against a total of 27 individuals under investigation for a number of crimes, including anti-constitutional actions, possession of illegal weapons caches, instigating racism, fascism, and xenophobia, and promoting a cult of personality accused of genocide and war crimes. So I guess this goes back to, again, Antonescu. So this is this bizarre thing that you're conducting a criminal investigation about what somebody or other may have said or written about the Romanian dictator from before World War II. So you're going all the way back, you know, from not just the for the post Ceausescu era. You're going back all the way back to the height of the Stalinist era in Romania, all the way back from before World War II to Antonescu. Um, and then here we have Romanian police hold this is Politico, and again, prosecutors suspect 27 people of acting against Romania's constitutional order, public incitement, initiation of a fascist organization, and false statements regarding the sources of financing an election campaign. But they didn't name Georgescu or his aides in their statement. And then again, we have this Romanian prosecutors grill Georgescu, and then it says, according to the news channel G4 Media, Georgescu is accused of involvement in a fascist organization and of promoting controversial ideologies and historical figures, including Marshal Antonescu, the dictator who allied with Nazi Germany during World War II. And then other media reports that Georgescu was being questioned about the financing of his election campaign last year. So if you look at all this, then you think this is really stretching things far. You're talking about, I know, somebody or other is a racist, somebody's a fascist, and he's defending Antonescu. Now, whatever you think about Antonescu, which apart from anything else, just seems kind of strange why we're debating somewhat the Iron Guard from before World War II. But whatever you think of Antonescu or Admiral Horthy in Hungary or whatever, I mean, part of free speech is that you get to express your views on Antonescu, Horthy, or whoever you want. I mean, if you're in Norway and you say, I think Quisling, got a bad deal and that he's not such a bad person, whatever, then that's part of free speech. Free speech is speech, that some people may not like and some people get upset by or offended by it, but it's part of free speech. You can't really turn that somehow where we're conducting a criminal investigation. What are you investigating? We're investigating people who are saying favorable things about Antonescu. And I said, well, who the hell is Antonescu? So, well, it's the Iron Guard. Oh, the Iron Guard, And so everybody has to look up, well, what the hell's the Iron Guard? So it's an absurdity, but it will play a key role because without question, this is going to be used against Georgescu to prevent him from running in May. So in May, you're going to have the two rounds of the presidential election, and they've been looking for some way of disqualifying him from running. I mean, something like that. They tried that with Trump, and he would have succeeded. There's no question he would have succeeded had Trump not, managed to get some conservative voices onto that Supreme Court. One of the earlier iterations of the U.S. Supreme Court would have gone against Trump, and then Trump would have been kept off the ballot. So it was quite a good fortune that Trump managed to stay on the ballot. I don't think that's going to work in Romania. I think in Romania, I mean, that has been so thoroughly infiltrated by Western money, with USAID and NED and so on. So I think that constitutional court, and we saw how it ruled, that constitutional court will rule against Georgescu and prevent him from running. So I think that they found a way to do it. I mean, they were looking for, I remember they were back in December, they were talking about, they're investigating money laundering. They're not talking about money laundering now. So now they're saying, well, they're investigating, he lied about his sources of funding. So they're not accusing him now, apparently, of money laundering. And after talking about that, they've decided, well, these racist and fascist organizations. What racist? What he's I haven't heard that he's a member of any racist and fascist organizations. He used to work at the United Nations. He had a job at the UN. His specialty is sustainable development. One of these things that the UN likes to talk about. And so now he's some far out fascist sympathizer, who has a soft spot for Marshal Antonescu. And next time we're going to talk a little bit about Marshal Antonescu and World War II. I mean, we're not going to talk about it today, but we'll talk about it next time, because we like to go in for these historical digressions. I think we talked before about Horthy and Hitler and World War II, but the Antonescu was actually executed after World War II. Horthy actually, he was quite fortunate. He managed to leave Hungary and lived out his life. He lived for about another 10. Can't remember exactly how many years. 10 years after World War II in Portugal, and lived into ripe old age. And he was never. I mean, I think the Hungarians made some half. Half-hearted attempts to extradite him from Portugal to put him on trial, but that never really happened. Though some Hungarian political leaders who had worked for Horthy, some of Horthy's prime ministers were executed after World War II, but Horthy himself managed to survive. Anyway, so that's that, and now we can go on about Sofia. And if you watch the kind of the news conference or the press availability of Starmer and Trump, it was kind of interesting. The Starmer, as like Macron, wants to introduce British forces into Ukraine. Starmer wants to introduce, NATO forces. Starmer, like Macron, wants to introduce NATO forces. So Starmer will introduce British forces, and of course Macron will introduce French forces. And they're not really interested in the substance of any kind of an agreement. Their only concern is to bring in what they call peacekeepers, but of course they're not talking about peacekeepers. They're talking about security guarantors. They as I've said a number of times before, they use these terms interchangeably precisely in order to confuse everybody, and the media do a very good job of confusing people by using these terms interchangeably: peacekeepers and essentially security backup. Because a peacekeeper is supposed to be a neutral, disinterested observer. They're there essentially, they're not on one side, they're not on the other side. They're essentially there to monitor a ceasefire. And if there are any violations of ceasefire, then they duly report it wherever, to the UN, the OSCE, whatever. That's what a peacekeeper does. A security guarantor, however, and that's what Macron is talking about, and that's what Starmer is talking about. That's all about providing military backing for Ukraine. And that's why both Macron and most emphatically Starmer have said, oh, well, if we don't have strong security guarantees, Putin is going to do this again. Putin will invade again. So essentially, they're there in order to provide military support for Ukraine. And essentially, I mean, what is a security guarantee? Is a blank check. You provide, to whomever you provide the security guarantee to, you're providing him with a blank check. So go ahead, provoke, whomever, because if they retaliate against you, we've got your back. And that's clearly the plan. So that once they've given Ukraine essentially these security guarantees, then Ukraine can do whatever it wants. It can provoke the Russians and then scream, "Hey, look, we're under attack." And you think Starmer or Macron will say, "Well, I think you kind of provoked this." No, they're going to say, "No, Russia's under attack." They're absolutely convinced of the villainy of the Russians and the innocence and virtuousness of the Ukrainians. So that's the goal. That's the plan of Starmer and Macron. That's why they came here this week. The one fly in the ointment for them is that they don't really think that they're strong enough to take on the Russians, because of course if they can provide the security guarantee to Ukraine, which is what they're doing. They're trying to do the security guarantee to Ukraine. But without American backup, without American air support, American intelligence, American satellite technology, American anti-missile systems, then they're going to be sitting ducks for the Russians, and they know this. So what you're getting from Macron and Starmer is nothing at all about the substance of any agreement. They haven't spelled out what are you going to agree on. Do you have any idea of the shape of a deal in Ukraine that you would accept? They haven't said any of that. The only thing for them, and the one that they keep repeating, is the security guarantee for Ukraine, and then the American backup, that's the key thing, the American backup. Now remember, the security guarantee was the last time we had a security guarantee, which was to Poland in 1939. It was, of course, absolutely catastrophic, because once they had that, there was really no real mechanism to avert a war, because once Poland had this unconditional support from England and France, was when they issued it. I think it was in March of 1939. They issued it. Poland really had no reason at all to make any concessions in its negotiations with Germany. Now you could say, well, why should they make any concession? Well, I mean, it's better to make concessions than to and avoid a war. Germany's demands were, on the face of it, not wholly unreasonable. Certainly, the demands made on Poland were a lot more reasonable than the one made on Czechoslovakia. But be that as it may, the problem was that the British, having issued the security guarantees, however, still wanted Poland to make some concessions to Germany in its negotiations on the issue of Danzig. I mean, what the Germans were saying is that, well, we want Danzig back. I mean, we made Danzig into a free city. Danzig is a German city. We want it back. They didn't, and they wanted some transport linking the two parts of Germany, across the Polish corridor. I mean, remember, Poland was given this quite a generous deal after World War I. They got Danzig, which initially was given to Poland. Then they made Danzig into a free city. But they also created this Polish corridor in order for Poland to be able to get access to Danzig, because that was part of the 14 points. Wilson's 14 points, recreation of the state of Poland. Poland would have an outlet to the sea, and Danzig was that outlet to the sea. But anyway, the British thought that the Poles should make concessions. But why should the Poles make concessions? Once they had the guarantee, the security guarantee from the British and the French, I said, well, why should we make any concessions? We've got the guarantee. And moreover, Stalin looked at that and said, well, why should I do anything for them? I mean, why should I get involved in this? The British and the French have already given the security guarantees. Well, I don't need to do anything. I mean, since the British and the French already committed to going to war on Poland's behalf, and they did it really without asking us to do it with them, so they made it nice and easy for them. Stalin could then begin negotiations with Hitler for a non-aggression pact. So it was an absolute disaster. It was the worst, stupidest thing you could do was to issue that security guarantee to Poland. It absolutely ensured that there would be a war. But in any case, so what you now have is that the British and the French have no interest at all in the substance of any agreement. They want, okay, we want British and French forces in Ukraine, and presumably somebody else, presumably the Germans. I don't know, maybe I don't know, Spanish. I don't know who else would be. I mean, the Balts and the Poles have said that they're not going to uh, be in Ukraine. They're not going to go to Ukraine. But the key is, how do we get the Americans in? Because, and that's again, now, if you watch this presser, all the questioners kept circling back to that point. Is Trump going to provide the backup to the British? And Trump, to his credit, was kind of deftly parried these questions. They over and over again they asked him this question, and there was a point who said, "Well, the British don't really need us. The British can take care of themselves. Boy, the British are really tough. They're very good." And Starmer looking not looking especially pleased with that. I should also say that Starmer came with the strategy of really buttering up Trump. So he arrived with this letter, this letter, which consisted of an invitation from King Charles for Trump to come to the United Kingdom on a state visit. This is a big deal. And over and over again, Starmer said that this is unprecedented. This is unprecedented. I wasn't sure what was unprecedented, that a president would get 2 state visits, or that it was unprecedented that the king would delegate his prime minister to issue an invitation for a state visit. And Trump, is very flattered, and he Trump naturally, yeah, sure, I'll come. Yeah, really enjoyed my state visit, and I think Trump is a bit of an Anglophile. I mean, there's no question. I mean, he really liked Charles's mother. I think he liked Queen Elizabeth II. His mother came from Scotland. He owns golf courses in Scotland, and I think he quite likes pomp and circumstance, and so he liked all that. I mean that, and I think, but to be fair, I think Trump was onto Starmer's game. He knows exactly what Starmer's trying to do. He's trying to rope the Americans into a military commitment on behalf of the British and the French, who in turn will provide these unconditional security guarantees to Ukraine. And so he kept saying, well, before Trump said it correctly, Trump said this correctly, well, before we talk about peacekeepers, we should talk about the peace agreement. We should talk about the deal. First, we need to get the deal, then we can talk about the peacekeepers. The Starmer, like Macron, he doesn't want to talk about that. He doesn't talk about the deal. He just wants to talk about the peacekeepers. He wants to get the Americans in. And so now we come to the issue of this agreement, this mining, extraction, whatever agreement between the United States and Ukraine. So Zelensky is coming to Washington on he's coming on Friday to sign this agreement. Now, I do think that we need to stop getting kind of caught up in this whole thing about mines, whether there's any money to be made when these mining, and whether where the mines are or whatever. I mean, that's all a complete waste of time. Nobody really knows to what extent Ukraine has these precious metals, these rare earths. The last geological surveys were done many years ago. So there would have, first of all, have to be new geological surveys done, and then you'd have to make assessments how much it would cost, whether it's economically feasible to start extracting these rare earths, these precious minerals, because it's very capital intensive. So no one's going to put up any capital before they're pretty sure that there's going to be some money to be made here. So anyway, but I don't think that's really important. And I'm not a geologist, and I can't get into these tiresome discussions. What is important is, what does Trump himself think? Because if Trump thinks that this is a good deal, then that's all that matters. Because if it's a good deal, and Trump thinks that this is somehow, he has secured an agreement with Ukraine that is going to make money for the United States, that somehow America is going to recoup some of the money it's invested in Ukraine. And that's what Trump keeps saying. He's saying over and over again, he keeps saying, we need to, we put in $350 billion. He keeps repeating that, and the media keep doing the fact check. Oh, it's not $350 billion, it's actually $120 billion. Who cares? Trump is going to keep repeating $350 billion, and that's it. There's no point in arguing about this. But if he thinks that, hey, we're going to recoup some of our losses in Ukraine, then that's going to be an incentive for Trump to stick with Ukraine. And that's why there's a lot of excitement about this agreement. They think that once Trump signs this agreement on Friday, Trump will have been essentially committed United States to Ukraine. Therefore, now United States has a vested interest in the survival and success of Ukraine. That's the calculation. Now, I'm not saying that will necessarily be the case, but that is the plan because up until now, essentially, these have all been free gifts for Ukraine. Just, hey, here's another nice chunk of change, just so long as you go on fighting against the Russians. But with Trump, there's always going to be a case that sooner or later he's going to say, well, this is all a charity. I don't believe in charity. We got to get something out of it. Hence this deal whereby America gets something out of it. Anyway, here is the outline of this agreement that has been. This is the latest version. So this is a different version from the one that I read out on Tuesday. So here we have, this is the bilateral agreement establishing terms and conditions for a reconstruction investment fund. And then, whereas the United States has provided significant financial and material support to Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion, whereas the American people desire to invest alongside Ukraine in a free, sovereign, and secure Ukraine, whereas the United States and Ukraine desire a lasting peace in Ukraine and a durable partnership between their two people and governments, whereas the United States and Ukraine recognize the contribution that Ukraine has made to strengthening international peace and security by voluntarily abandoning the world's third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, and we talked about this the other day. Whereas the United States and Ukraine wish to ensure that those states and other persons that have acted adversely to Ukraine in the conflict do not benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. So notice that again, this is those states and others that have acted adversely to Ukraine do not benefit. So in some ways, therefore, the United States is committed to ensuring that Russia does not benefit in any way from reconstruction of Ukraine. I'm not sure how the United States can do this short of going to war with Russia, but that seems to be, in any case, the implication there. And then now, therefore, the government of the United States and the government of Ukraine hereby enter into this bilateral agreement establishing terms and conditions for a reconstruction investment fund to deepen the partnership between the United States and Ukraine. And then, so this is point one, the governments of Ukraine and the United States, with the aim of achieving lasting peace, blah, blah, intend to establish this reconstruction investment fund through joint ownership to be further defined. So this is where they've changed it. I mean, in the earlier version, the one I read out the other day, it was the Americans were going to have 100% of that. The fund they would own it, but this is a joint ownership. Joint ownership will take into consideration the actual contributions of the participants. The fund will be jointly managed by the government of United States and Ukraine, and so on. Anyway, the maximum percentage of ownership of the fund's equity and financial interest to be held by the government of the United States, and the decision-making government of the United States will be to the extent permissible under applicable U.S. laws. Neither participant will sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of, directly or indirectly, any portion of its interest in the fund without the prior written consent of the other participant. The fund will collect and reinvest revenues contributed to the fund minus expenses incurred by the fund, and will earn income from the future monetization of all relevant Ukrainian government-owned natural resource assets, whether owned directly or indirectly by the Ukrainian government. So that's that will earn income from the fund will collect and reinvest revenues contribute to the fund minus expenses, and will earn income from the future monetization of all relevant Ukrainian government-owned natural resource assets. So it's not about these rare earths. Then the government of Ukraine will contribute to the fund 50% of all revenues earned from the future monetization of all relevant Ukrainian government-owned natural resource assets, defined as deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and other extractable materials, and other infrastructure relevant to natural resource assets, such as liquefied natural gas terminals and port infrastructure. Again, please let's not get caught up on this damn rare earths. It's much more extensive than that. So again, government-owned natural resource assets defined as deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and other extractable materials, and other infrastructure relevant to natural resource assets, such as liquefied natural gas terminals and port infrastructure. And then the fund, in its sole discretion, may credit or return to the government of Ukraine actual expenses. Anyway, it goes on there. And then we have Article 4. Subject to applicable United States law, the government of the United States will maintain long-term financial commitment to the development of a stable and economically prosperous Ukraine. Further contributions may be comprised of funds, financial instruments, and other tangible and intangible assets critical for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So you have the United States will maintain a long-term financial commitment to the development of a stable and economically prosperous Ukraine. Then the fund's investment process will be designed so as to invest in projects in Ukraine and attract investments to increase the development, processing, and monetization of all public and private Ukrainian assets, including but not limited to deposits of minerals, hydrocarbons, oils, and other extractable materials. And then the government of the United States and the government of Ukraine intend that their investment process will lead to opportunities for distribution of additional funds and greater reinvestment to ensure the sufficient supply of capital. And then the participants will reserve the right to take such action as necessary to protect and maximize the value of their economic interests in the fund. So, take such action as necessary to protect and maximize the value of their economic interests. And then the fund agreement, this is Article 6, the fund agreement will include appropriate representations and warranties, including blah, blah. That it may the undertake do not sell, convey, transfer, pledge, or otherwise encumber the okay. In drafting the fund agreement, the participants will strive to avoid conflicts with Ukraine's obligations under its accession to the European Union or its obligations under arrangements with international financial institutions. This is the Americans say, well, this is ours, nothing, and no one else gets any dibs in it. And then the fund agreement will provide an acknowledgement that both the fund agreement and the activities provided for therein are commercial in nature, blah, blah. And then 8, the fund agreement will pay particular attention to the control mechanisms that make it impossible to weaken, violate, or circumvent sanctions and other restrictive measures. So we'll pay particularly to the control mechanisms that make it impossible to weaken, violate, or circumvent sanctions and other restrictive measures. So, in other words, they're making sure that the Russians will not in any way put any restrictions on this agreement. And then 10, the bilateral agreement and the fund agreement will constitute integral elements of the architecture of bilateral and multilateral agreements, as well as concrete steps to establish a lasting peace and to strengthen economic security, resilience, and reflect the objectives set forth in this. The government of the United States supports Ukraine's efforts to obtain security guarantees needed to establish lasting peace. Participants will seek to identify any necessary steps to protect mutual investments as defined in the fund agreement. So the government of the United States supports Ukraine's effort to obtain security guarantees needed to establish lasting peace. So when we look at this, and obviously there are no formal security commitments written down by the United States. However, it's clear that essentially what Trump has done is tied United States with Ukraine. There's all the talk about they're going to push Zelensky under the bus, they're going to abandon Ukraine, they're going to walk away from Ukraine. That obviously isn't happening. The opposite is happening. So while it's true that there is no formal military commitment to Ukraine here, the United States is now tying itself to Ukraine and tying itself particularly on the issue of that somehow Ukraine needs to pay back the United States. Well, that's a very interesting position because it's like a creditor decides that he is going to protect the debtor from any rival gangs. So let's say you're a debtor, and there are a number of creditors coming after you, and you're under threat, from others. So essentially, the creditor says, we're going to protect you. We're not going to allow anyone to mess with you because you are a debtor, and you need to pay us back what you owe us. So therefore, we will protect you from other gangsters and whatever because we need you to work off your debt to us. That seems to be the thrust of this, that somehow Ukraine owes the United States, and the United States will basically make sure that no one messes with Ukraine. And Trump said this. He said something like, when he was asked, he constantly asked, well, you're going to provide a kind of a security commitment. He says, yeah, we are going to be there. We are going to be in Ukraine. And as long as we are there, no one is going to mess with us. So we are going to be there making sure Ukraine pays us off, and no one's going to mess with us because we're absolutely determined to ensure that Ukraine pays off its debt to us. And Ukraine is quite happy. That's really what they got. So no, there's no formal military commitment from the United States here. But at the same time, they've gone quite a long way to providing a commitment to, Ukraine in the long term. That's why Starmer and Macron are really very happy about this. Yeah, fine. We don't need all these deals. Take whatever you want. Take the minerals, take the rare earths, take the oil, the gas, whatever you want. But it means you are essentially tying yourself to Ukraine. And that is contrary to all the talk that we've heard in the past few weeks that Trump was going to walk away from Ukraine. That was the talk. Trump was going to walk away from Ukraine. He's not interested in this. He's got other fish to fry. He's going to push Zelensky under the bus. And remember how excited everybody was last week when we had that whole spat about dictator, causing him a dictator, and then Trump sent out that truth about the elections and whatnot. And lo and behold, Zelensky's coming to Washington, and they are going to sign an agreement. So there really shouldn't have been this this excitement about that. It's the same people. It's the same people. They've been saying the same thing for 3 years. The Americans are going to push Zelensky under the bus. The Americans are going to walk away from Ukraine. Moon of Alabama has been writing that same article for 3 years. Same article, 3 years. At each point that the Americans are going to walk away. But instead of, no one is walking away. And the only way this war could come to an end is precisely if America walked away. If America walked away, then essentially the Europeans might be left. Yeah, we will support Ukraine, but the Europeans can't do it. They don't have the resources to do this, and they don't want to get themselves into any possibility of a shooting war with Russia. They're not going to do that unless America has their back. And that's the only way that this war could have been brought to an end. But that doesn't look like that's going to happen. Now things could change. It's a possibility. Trump is mercurial, to say the least. But at the moment, I don't see any major changes, because there is no way. I have been one of the few who says I think Russia will settle for not achieving its goals. I've never been one of these people who think Russia will just march on, and get they'll take Odessa, whatever. I thought Russia would settle short of its goals. But under these circumstances, Russia's not going to settle. There's no way Russia could settle for any kind of a ceasefire while the British, the French, the NATO forces are in Ukraine. That will obviously be a recipe for restarting this war again in 5 years' time. This would be clearly Minsk III. It's just a frozen conflict until the whole thing starts again in 5 years. There's no way Russia could settle for this. And that was the point. If there was a ceasefire along the lines of the current contact, and this went together with some form of demilitarization of Ukraine and some form of a commitment. No NATO forces in Ukraine. In other words, no missiles in Ukraine, no NATO forces in Ukraine, and then the peacekeepers will come from neutral countries, whether it's India or the Philippines or wherever. Then I'm saying, well, maybe Russia will take it, even though they haven't achieved their goals. They haven't achieved, the bringing the four oblasts under full control. I thought maybe Russia could settle, but there's no way that they could settle for this. There was no way they're going to settle for the British and the French, and then the Americans getting a kind of de facto commitment to Ukraine. That would be just totally unacceptable to Russia. Anyway, let's take a look at our the Gagglers on our locals page, the people who keep the dogs, in off my back, which I really feel very honored that there are these Gagglers who try to protect me. They know what a hard time I have from the dogs, so I really appreciate it. So now, so thank you very much, everybody from our locals community. Anyway, Danaki, always good to see you. Danaki says, Kedvesh George, when are these often well-meaning but in the end utterly delusional Xanon hopium addicts going to stop this idiotic mantra, we're winning, Russia's winning, Russia ain't never going to stop? Snap the fuck out of it. Russia is desperate to jump back into the treacherous Western embrace, man. I guess they're going to do the that routine for some time longer. I was in a discussion on Andrew Eborn's new show. It's an Octopus TV, or I'm not sure. It's called The Pulse or whatever. I'm not sure. It's online. It's The Pulse. And I was on a panel. There was Ambassador Peter Ford and some guy called Dmitry Orlov. I mean, people may know who he is. I vaguely heard of him, but I don't really have any clear sense of who he was. And he was saying just that somehow Russia isn't going to stop for anything. It's going to march on to take Kharkov. It is going to take Odessa, and presumably then it's going to be on to Kiev. I was, of course, it's like one of those things where people speak and then you just listen. But it did occur to me that how is that going to be done? I mean, if you're having difficulties taking Pokrovsk, and you haven't taken Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, I just don't know how you're going to take Kharkov. These are big cities, well-defended big cities. How are you going to take Odessa? I mean, these are it's a big city. I don't know. It's a mantra. It's a very strange kind of. It's a cult, and the odd thing about a cult is because my sympathies are obviously with Russia and have been, because I think Russia's cause is a just cause. I think it was a very reasonable cause. However, whether you have sympathy for Russia is somehow different from making this, just repeating this claim of about these fantastic victories that are coming. That one after another, these Ukrainian cities are going to fall to Russia, and but that's what I mean. It's a cult, and you can't really argue with a cult. So, yeah. So your question, when's that going to stop? It isn't. I guess until something is signed, a deal is signed, and then for the time being, anyway, the war will be brought to an end. However, I can say now that I don't think Kharkov and Odessa are going to fall any time in the near future. And anyway, Danaki says, and secondly, R.I.P. Gene Hackman. Yeah, we talked about him. One hell of an actor. I agree. What's your character film of his? And Gagglers. Well, I guess my favorite would be the French Connection one. I didn't much care for French Connection two, but French Connection one, that performance of Popeye Doyle, would be one of my favorite. But I also liked his performance in Unforgiven, because and I think I've talked about it before, that while he is clearly not a likable person, there's a kind of nasty sadistic quality to him. He at the same time is on the side of good. It was a morally complex film, whereby this sheriff, who was very brutal. I mean, if you remember the way he beat up the that bounty hunter, the gunslinger Richard Harris, English Bob. But I mean, it was presented in a very brutal way. On the other hand, you knew, well, he's doing the right thing. He's the sheriff. He wants to maintain law and order in this town, and he can't have all these bounty hunters coming in trying to kill somebody in the town. They said, we're not going to do it, and I want to send a message to all bounty hunters, wherever they are, that don't come here, because you'll get this and worse if you come. And so, in the end, when the Clint Eastwood character William Money kills him, in a way, your sympathy is supposed to be with the Clint Eastwood. It's Clint Eastwood's film. You're always supposed to be on Clint Eastwood's side. But something bad has happened here, because the Clint Eastwood character is a bounty hunter, and the bounty hunter has killed law and order. He's the man who embodied law and order. And the bounty hunter essentially has destroyed the city. He's just totally destroyed the town. What's left of the town is it's a wreck. And so I like that character. Because I think it was a morally ambiguous character, and it was just an interesting portrayal. So I think those would be my two favorite. I mean, The Conversation was a good film, but he himself was rather, understated, to say the least. Stone River says Popeye Doyle role. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I always remember that his famous little effete hand, wave to Chonier, the big drug kingpin, was a a wonderful scene with that little wave of his. But again, the French Connection had a number of good scenes. I mean, the scene with that little effete wave was good. But one of my favorite scenes in the French Connection is when those two drug kingpins are having lunch in some really swanky, expensive French restaurant up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And they go through this whole routine of they first order snails, and then they have the French onion soup, then they have the meat dish, then they have a dessert. Of course, they choose excellent wine. I think they have a cognac with a coffee at the end. And obviously this lunch stretches out over several hours, and they're being monitored by Popeye Doyle and his sidekick character, and they're out in the cold. It's a very cold Manhattan day. They're out in the cold, and they're eating a slice of pizza. So there they are. The drug kingpins are having this really, really delicious, very expensive lunch, the cops who are on their tail, they're stuck with eating pizza, and I think then uh, the when he comes out with this coffee, and he so sarcastically says, which do you want, the red or the white? He drinks this he takes one swallow of this disgusting coffee and then just spits it out. So I thought it's just a wonderful scene of kind of class in New York. Swanky restaurant inhabited by drug kingpins. The cops, supposedly on the side of good, they have to make do with slices of pizza. Anyway, Stone River says Vance's timing, Romania, is impeccable. It is indeed. Absolutely. And then Psinook says that it says, I mean, this is, I can see there's a headline from the New York Post says, Trump says U.S. will try to get Ukraine as much land back as possible, but Zelensky can forget about NATO. Yeah, that's what Trump said today during the press availability with Starmer. He ruled out, ridiculed the whole idea of NATO. And then he did talk about, he's going to try and get as much land back as possible, whatever that means. Anyway, Psinook says, hope Russia is not popping champagne bottles. There will be no peace plan. Oh, I should have said, sorry, Stone River, thank you so much for your generosity. You're absolutely right. About Vance's timing in Romania, thank you so much for your generous contribution. Really appreciate that. And Psinook again, also, thank you so much for your generosity. Anyway, Psinook goes on, hope Russia is not popping champagne bottles. There will be no peace plan. Yep. I actually heard Trump's news conference with Starmer, and he said the U.S. will try to recover Crimea. Did he say that? I missed where he said Crimea. I heard he said, I'm going to try and get as much land back as possible, but I didn't hear him say Crimea. Yeah, I did think that a number of these celebrations on the part of the Russians were, shall we say, premature. I heard a little bit. I haven't heard all of it. I heard a little bit of the interview with between Glenn Greenwald and uh, Alexander Dugin. It was about an hour and a half, and I'm not sure I can listen to Dugin for an hour and a half. But I thought again Dugin's ideas were very, very superficial, and I always think this about Dugin. I think he's obviously a learned man, but his account of the world is very superficial, and his idolatry of Trump and saying, oh well, he's a national populist. Trump isn't going to be Russia's friend. There's no reason why he should be Russia's friend, but somehow the expectation that Trump is going to deliver for Russia, it's stunning. In its sort of, I don't know, kind of fatuous optimism. If you think of Trump, now let's say Trump wants a ceasefire along the current lines. Well, Trump might think that's not a bad deal, but Trump isn't going to deliver. He's not going to apply pressure on Romania. I mean, on Zelensky to withdraw from the 4 oblasts. Those parts of the oblasts that are not under Russian control, the parts of Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye that are not under Russian control. He's not going to ask Ukraine to do that. Well, why would he do that? Why would he do that for the Russians? At best, Trump is going to say, look, to the Russians, hey, this is what you accomplished. You had 3 years to do this. You had 3 years to try to liberate these territories. You weren't able to do it. In none of the 4, incidentally. Even in Lugansk, it hasn't been wholly freed of all Ukrainian military presence. But so that's what you achieved. That's what you did. You had 3 years. That's what you got. Why should I help you accomplish what you weren't able to accomplish by force of arms? I mean, you had a chance. You could have used your force more effectively. You could have liberated these oblasts. You didn't do so. So, but I'm not going to do this for you. And that's again, that's the best one can do. And there's still the issue, incidentally, about Kursk, because again, unless Russia can quickly push the Ukrainians completely out of Kursk, then whatever's being negotiated about Kursk, basically Russia will get back Kursk, but they will in turn have to give something up, in one of those oblasts. I don't know what, but unless Russia can actually push them out, within the next few weeks, and in other words, entirely liberate Kursk, then that's going to be up for negotiation and some kind of exchange of territory. So, I mean, the popping of champagne bottles. I've seen a number of these articles on the RT website. Where there's a lot of these, talking about this fantastic historic accomplishment, for the Russians. Trump, yeah, he's talking our language. No. Trump is that's not. He's not talking the Russian language, and there's no need for him to do so. I mean, after all, the Russians aren't doing anything for Trump, and Trump doesn't have to do anything for the Russians. I mean, in each case, you should be pursuing your own national interests and not thinking about what somebody else is doing. It's it's I mean, it's a little bit of a kind of a Russian practice. I maybe I told this story before about the when what's the name, the Russian foreign minister, terrible foreign minister in the 1990s, Andrei Kozyrev, and he was he was introduced to Nixon so this was already, Nixon was already quite old by then, by Dmitry Simes. And Kozyrev, he talked to Nixon, and he asked Nixon, "What do you think Russian foreign policy should be?" And then Nixon spoke to Dmitry Simes afterwards, and he said, "I was very troubled by this question from the Russian foreign minister because, I'm a former president of the United States. The way I think is what's good for the United States. That's my, that's my raison d'être. I have to think about what's good for the United States. So when a Russian foreign minister comes to ask me, what kind of an answer does he expect from me? I only want what's good for the United States. I'm not concerned with what's good for Russia. It's like if you're in a courtroom, and you go to the other side, the lawyer to the other side, and try to get legal advice from the lawyer from the other side. He can't do it because I represent the other side. I can't give you this advice. Anyway, Ivan Grozny. Always good to see you. I really like that name, Ivan Grozny. It says, "Good evening, George. Good evening, Ivan. George, would you please let me finish and stop interrupting me?" Peter Joe. "Find that you both have come to some disagreements as this conflict in Ukraine seems to be coming to an end. Well, we'll see whether it's coming to an end. It's a shame. I'd like for Peter to be right, but I tend to agree with your realism on what's likely to happen. What do you think is the timeline for the Ukraine agreement? Also convenient that Trump walked his comments back today on calling Zelensky a dictator." So yeah, he was asked this at the press availability. He was asked, "Do you still think," or something like, "Do you still think that Zelensky is a dictator?" And he said, he was very deft. He was obviously expecting that question. And he very deftly said, "Oh, did I say that? I can't believe I said that." Boom! He let that go. I thought, oh, this is going to be a tough one. How's he going to get out of it? He got out of it quite, quite humorously. I look. Agree with the way you've characterized it. I would love to be wrong. I would love to think that the Russians are going to march and take Odessa. I'd love that the Russians would take Kharkov. I would love it if they take Kiev. I was hoping they would take Kiev back in February 2022. No question. I would love it. I mean, and I say, yeah, I was wrong, and I'd be more than happy to say I was wrong, and I'm glad that I was wrong. On the other hand, I kind of have um, history to go by. I mean, we've this has been going on for 3 years, and we haven't seen any of these great breakthroughs. We've had these ferocious battles, but to no real effect. I mean, what was the point of Bakhmut? I mean, it didn't make any difference. I mean, a lot of people died, but it didn't make any real difference in Bakhmut. I mean, Avdivka, what difference does that make? So, so if if you have difficulties with these kinds of fights, I mean, you're gonna taking Kharkov. That's a very big project, and I don't think it's gonna happen. So now your point is it going to come to an end? I don't see it. I really don't see it. I think Trump is the best hope one can have for bringing this to an end. But for him to bring this to an end, he would have to do what I think he's not willing to do. I think he would have to pull the plug on Ukraine. He's not willing to do that. I think the whole point of this agreement, leaving aside whether there's any money to be had, which I think is just a sideshow, because nobody knows whether there's going to be any money to be made. But the point is, Trump has now made this firm commitment of the United States to Ukraine, which is to the United States now has a vested interest in the security, even though there isn't a formal commitment to go to war on Ukraine's behalf, but essentially made a commitment of security because we have to keep the investment secure. And Trump, the way he presented it, well, we're going to be on the ground, and no one is going to mess with us because we're going to be on the ground. And so that's why once you have that, then I don't see how this war comes to an end, because we now have the Europeans, the British, the French, the Germans, who want to keep this war going. We have Zelensky, obviously wants to keep this war going. We now have the Americans, who are going to be planning on making some kinds of investments. Then I don't see what would be the basis of a peace plan. There's no way the Russians are going to accept the presence of British, French forces in Ukraine. I mean, they know perfectly well what's the purpose of bringing the British and French in. The purpose is to provoke a war. That's why they're there. They're not interested in a peace agreement. They want to provoke a conflict. Provoke a conflict in which the Americans will be involved. So that's why. I don't think Russians. There's anything here that the Russians can accept. Because if they were to accept this, then that would be a total defeat and a humiliation for them, because they're accepting now the very thing that they originally went to war to avert, which was a NATO presence in Ukraine. Now they would have to accept NATO presence in Ukraine. There's no way that Russia could accept this. Anyway, Ivan Grozny goes on, and of course, too warm of a welcome for Keir after J.D. Vance called him out just a few weeks earlier. Yes, I agree with that. It was an interesting moment when Trump called on Vance to speak during this press availability, and Vance spoke, but very briefly. He really didn't want to go into the points that he made during his Munich speech. So Ivan goes and says, "Sorry for the several questions here, but the Tate brothers seem to be free. What are your thoughts on them? You know, the Tate is just not my. He's not just not my cup of tea. I mean, I know we're supposed to admire them and take an interest in them, but I saw the interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. I didn't think there was anything there uh, that particularly interested me. I mean, I think the charges against him, I think, is absurd. But I just don't find um, people like the Tates to be I don't know, avatars for any major cultural transformation. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should take more of a take a longer look into them. But at the moment, I don't see there's anything in the Tates uh, that is going to herald some major cultural change. Um, but again, I know it's maybe I'm wrong. I just don't see it. And then Marty, always very good to see you. Thank you so much for your generosity, as always, Marty. And your point about Eureka is, I think that's a very good suggestion. And Judy, very, very good to see you. Thank you, Judy, as always, for your generosity. And then Judy asks, do you think Trump, quote, walked it back? Asked by a reporter if he stands by his earlier comments calling Zelensky as a dictator. He said, "Did I say that?" Trump asks. "I can't believe I said that." Next question. I thought that, as I said earlier, I thought that he handled it very skillfully because he was obviously expecting that question, and I was wondering how is he going to get out of it? What's he going to say? Oh, is he going to go through a convoluted explanation? Well, when I said that, I meant this, and blah blah blah. But he said, "Oh, did I say that? I can't believe I said that." Boom, and that's it. That ended the whole thing. It's a little like uh, I was thinking like in you remember that's the famous scene in Goodfellas about how am I funny, and he goes on, how am I funny? You think, well, how this is going to end badly, this somebody's going to get killed with this, and then somehow he just throws his arms up and says, so get the f out of here, and that's it. You ended by with a joke and humorous, and something that could have been really nasty and unpleasant goes away. So he did that very skillfully. Um, and but Trump is an entertainer. He's been in this business for many years. I mean, he's good. He knows how television works. He's been uh, being interviewed by people all of his life, and so therefore. He knows what to do when he gets an awkward question. Anyway, and then Judy says, it's just another Trumpism, like his jab today at Starmer about possibly backing US peacekeepers. He said, the British can take care of themselves. Yeah, exactly. But we always back the British. Do you think you can beat the Russians? Starmer said, well, Trump said, next question. That whole sequence was very, very funny because he said, well, the British can take care. Well, they don't need us, which is actually the opposite of what he has said in the past. I mean, his line in the past was that, well, we basically had to bail out, the Europeans, all of the Europeans. We had to bail them out in World War One, bail them out in World War Two, bail them out during the Cold War. For him to say, "Oh, the British can take care of themselves," was very amusing. But if you watch Starmer's face when he said that, Starmer was completely unsmiling. He wasn't happy with that answer. And then he said, but we always back the British, but he left it vague. I thought that the way he handled today's press availability was masterful. I mean, I don't think much of this agreement with Ukraine. I think it's a really bad idea. I think it's a terrible idea. As I said the other day, I take the Bannon line when he said, walk the fuck away. That's what is this should be. Don't get into this agreement. But the way he handled that today, and he dealt with, because he knew exactly what Starmer was doing. He was ready for all Starmer's trickery. He knew about this invitation from King Charles. He knew what this was about. That they were trying to play on his vanity and how flattered he would be by this invitation for another state visit. So he was ready for all of his for Starmer's trickery. And I think he handled Starmer, completely lacks any kind of any sort of presence. I mean, he's this sort of the very opposite. Whatever you call charisma, it's the very opposite of here's a kind of negative charisma. But there's no question, from the start, you knew Starmer had a mission. I mean, he came there with that mission to rope America in. Trump knew that was his mission, and so he went out of his way to find to essentially sidetrack the conversation somewhere else, and that was masterful. With the do you think you can beat the Russians? And it was actually a very funny question, because if, like, you say, well, of course I can beat the Russians. You just give it to me. I'll knock that block off. Um, but of course, that's the point. The British can't. They can only do it with the Americans, and Trump knows that, and Trump knows that the British know that they can't. So he did that. I thought it was Trump at his best today. I was really impressed with his with his performance. And the point, I think Ivan was that, no, I think it was Sinoku said about the liberation of the territories. He didn't really promise that he was going to liberate anything. Well, we'll try and get back as much as we can, which is definitely a long way from saying we are committed to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. I mean, that's a long way. And the way he ridiculed the NATO membership thing, that was also. Starmer didn't like that. If you watched his face, he wasn't at all happy when he ridiculed the idea of Ukraine in NATO. Anyway, Judy, thank you so much. Thank you as always for your generosity and for all of your very, very insightful comments on our locals board. I always learn from your observations and your very, very, very thoughtful insights and comments. So thank you, Judy. Thank you for all that you do for our community. And then Kick567 says, "Wow, as of today, 23 countries in Europe are not part of the EU from A to Z. Oh, Albania to Vatican City." Yeah, it's kind of interesting that there are a number of countries that have been, corralled into NATO, but they're not in the EU. I mean, it used to be that you joined NATO, and then that was your rite of passage. Next step, the EU. That's the way it used to work. Worked for Hungary and Poland, Czech Republic, the Baltic states. Now you get your NATO membership, but your EU membership is is way down the line. So so Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia. Yeah, they're a long way from EU membership. Anyway, so, and it says Keir Starmer is reported on his way back to the UK. Is he already back to the UK? Yeah, that's good. With the blessing of His Eminence Trump, Mr. Starmer handed, the King and the Trumpinator. Trump patted the old boy and the knight for his services. I mean, look, I think I think Trump will show up for this the state visit. I think it's very flattering, and he likes he likes the British, and they know, he's a bit of a sucker for pomp and circumstance, changing of the guard, all that kind of thing. So I am sure that when he makes his state visit, the British will really lay things on for him. You know, the British at their most grand and pompous, just for him. Um, Robert, it was very good to see you. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you as always for your generosity. So Robert says, George, I saw your recent appearance on Moats and Redacted, where amazingly both Galloway and Morris managed to botch the pronunciation of your name. Yep. Yeah, absolutely right. Indicating that they must not watch the Gaggle, where you make it a point to state your name at the beginning. Yes, you're absolutely right. In any case, the term traffic light coalition came up, and I was wondering if you could explain what is meant by it. Yes, but first of all, you're absolutely right. The thing about my name is it drives me up the wall. I mean, they didn't get it so badly wrong. I mean, that's why I tolerated it. I only become very intolerant when people really make a hash of it, and that's when I get so. When I used to do more regular things for Press TV Iran, some of them were quite good. They learned how to pronounce my name, but some of them were just absolutely terrible. And then before I even started saying anything, I would really tell them that's how you pronounce my name. So, um, but probably I don't know whether they watch the Gaggle, but it's one of those things that for some reason people get completely befuddled by pronouncing names. I always find it's generally quite easy. You just read it as it is. But somehow, the moment they see like an S followed by a Z or Z, they're just thrown out of completely thrown out of kilter. And I don't understand it. I don't because I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, just I mean, you that Hungarian silent Z is not so uncommon, but but it throws so many people off. So now you think about the traffic light coalition that what you had in the outgoing government is that you had the chancellor Sergeant Schultz. He was from the Social Democrats, so that's the red. And then you had the Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, and then Robert Habeck, who is the economy minister, and they were from the Greens. So that's the Greens. And then they had the Free Democrats, and I guess they're yellow. I don't quite know why they were deemed yellow, but that was it. So that was the traffic light coalition: red, yellow, green. Um, and so it's just a shorthand. But then what happened was it was always a very uneasy alliance because you've got the Free Democrats who are basically laissez-faire capitalists, but they're budget hawks. They don't particularly like running up debts. They don't like budget deficits. So it was a very uncomfortable for them to be in with the socialists and the Greens, who like government spending and they don't really worry too much about deficits. So inevitably, the coalition fell apart. But that's the origin of the term the traffic light coalition. Anyway, Robert, thank you so much. Thank you as always for your generosity. Um, and Anne Marie, thank you so much. Thank you again for your generosity. So nice to see you. And we talked about last time about this, the really outstanding piece of music you just selected with the Astor Piazzolla. And again, Anne Marie, if there's any other works of yours, any performances of yours that you have footage of, would love it if you could post it on our locals page. I know everyone really appreciated that what you posted for Julian Assange. It was such beautiful playing. So anything you have really would be great. And anyway, Kick567 says, I found Trump disgusting talking about deals over the dead bodies of innocent civilian Ukrainians and Gazans. Trump posted that, the AI clip of Gaza, Trump Gaza, with Netanyahu and Trump taking sun on the Gaza beach, and then showing a gold idol of His Eminence in central Gaza, and so on and so forth. The the thing is that what I don't fully understand is why Trump is doing this with this whole Gaza Lago, Riviera in on the Mediterranean, and all this nonsense. And the reason that I say it's all this nonsense because it cannot be done. You cannot move out 2 million Palestinians. You just can't. But there's nowhere to go. There's no one's going to take them. There's nowhere to put them. So that it you can't do it. And the Americans don't have the wherewithal to drive out 2 millions, and the military would rebel if they had to start pushing women and children out. They just wouldn't do it. The Israelis wouldn't do it either because they don't have the will. They're not good at any kind of hand-to-hand combat anywhere where they're likely to suffer serious casualties, which is what would be necessary if they started a kind of ethnic cleansing campaign in Gaza. So it's not going to happen. And I guess he thinks this is a joke, that he can keep doing this, annoying people, winding people up, pressing these various buttons, and that's what I can think of. It's like it's the same as continually referring to the Trudeau as Justin Trudeau as Governor Trudeau. I mean, it's funny. I mean, it is very funny. He keeps calling him Governor Trudeau, but that isn't going to make Canada the 51st state. I mean, however much it's so funny that he keeps referring to him as Governor Trudeau, but the mechanics of making Canada the 51st state is quite a complicated one. And it's not going to happen just by saying Governor Trudeau. So I just think he keeps saying this, and people get angry, people get frustrated, but it isn't going to happen. I mean, there's no way that you're going to be able to drive out 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, and none of the Arab countries would tolerate this, and that it's an impossibility. So quite funny. I mean, if you find that sort of thing funny, but ultimately he's just doing it. He's just I think he's just winding people up because he knows this is going to draw attention in the media. People are going to be talking about this, and he's good at that. He's very good at setting the agenda. He's very good at always being in the news. And he's always been good at that. That's who Trump was. I mean, even back in the day when he was just a figure in New York, he was very good at getting the tabloids always writing about him. So I think that's why he's doing it. It's distasteful, obviously, what he's writing about Gaza, but I don't take any of that seriously. So remember Kicks 567. I stopped listening to Trump in public. I'm not fooled like most about what Trump says in public. Behind closed doors is the real action. You should know that, George. So Starman means nothing, believe me. Yeah. All right. Where is it? And then Marx 2023 says, seems to me the Russians have no choice but to fight until capitulation of the last Ukrainian. I don't know if that whether you can go on fighting until that moment, because I think that's going to be that could be a long way off. At the moment, there's nothing. I can't see anything on the table that would tempt the Russians to sign any kind of a peace agreement. There's nothing there. I mean, as long as Starmer and Macron insist on putting themselves into Ukraine, inserting themselves into Ukraine, then I don't see any purpose at all. There's no way the Russians can accept that. So then, yeah, the war goes on. But I don't want to think about the capitulation of the last Ukrainian, because that's just, that would be just a tragedy. I mean, Russians and Ukrainians are, I mean, they're not the same people, but they are very close. And the last Ukrainian would be a tragic and demographic disaster for Russians, because there's so much intermarriage and everything among Russians and Ukrainians. So it would just be a horrific outcome. Anyway, Laura Oat, always good to see you, says that Laura says one thing is what Russia should do, and another is what Putin is willing or sell for. Yeah, I settle or sell for. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, exactly. It's easy to say what Russia should do, but we've had many occasions in the past when I think Russia settled for something that it shouldn't have settled for. I think Minsk was something that they shouldn't have settled for, and they had the means at that time to force their will onto Ukraine. Ukraine was completely unprepared to fight Russia in 2014. I don't think the Russians should have allowed Yanukovych to be overthrown in the way he was. I don't think the Russians should have withdrawn from Kiev in March 2022, because at that, as long as they surrounded Kiev, they had leverage against Ukraine. So yeah, there's an unfortunate record of Russia settling things that were obviously disastrous for Russia. But at the moment, as long as the NATO countries such as the UK, France, and Germany insist on putting their forces into Ukraine, then there's nothing at all here for Russia to agree to. So in a way, Russia's then off the hook because they're not under any kind of pressure to settle. If that was taken off the table, no British or French forces in Ukraine, but maybe neutral countries, and essentially Russia then stops at the current line of contact. That may be something Russia would settle for. Again, we're a long way. We're going to take Odessa. We're going to take Kharkov and all that. Long way. Then I think Russia might be tempted to settle for, a ceasefire on the line of contact. But as long as we're talking about NATO countries in Ukraine, there's no deal there. And then Robert says the topic of bounty hunters is interesting. In fact, bounty hunters almost never injure, much less kill, the bail jumpers they are paid to apprehend. They are motivated entirely by profit. Humanely apprehended, the bail jumper, by way of finesse, rather than force the better to avoid potential lawsuits, which monopoly government security, also known as the police, shielded from. In contrast, New York Police Department has paid out over $1 billion to settle unlawful injury cases. You're absolutely right. The problem in Unforgiven was it wasn't just so much that they were bounty hunters. I mean, they were paid to kill. They were paid to kill, the guys who essentially disfigured one of the women. So they were more than just bounty hunters. They were hired assassins. And I think that's what the Little Bill, the Gene Hackman character, who said something, I don't like hired assassins. That's so that was, you're absolutely right. Bounty hunters do ensure that they don't cause any physical injury to the bail jumpers. But in this case, they were hired in order to kill this person. But again, it was fundamentally unjust, because while obviously it was terrible what they did, they disfigured her face, they didn't kill her. If you recall in The Godfather, when that man demands that Don Corleone kill the men who disfigured his daughter. Again, I think they also like disfigured her face or whatever. Um, and then Don Corleone says, "Well, that isn't really justice. Your daughter is still alive, and you're asking me to kill these men who disfigured your daughter's face. That's not justice." So in the same way, there was no justice here. So everything here was about unjust, and so in Unforgiven, where apparently justice has prevailed when the Clint Eastwood, the William Money rides off, it's fundamentally unjust. It's an indictment of the lynch mob. And the one person I think who stood against the lynch mob, taking the law into your own hands, was Little Bill. Not a likable person, a very unlikable person, but Little Bill did stand for the rule of law, and that that you can't take the law into your own hands. You can't just simply decide you for yourself what's just and what isn't. So I think so. That's why I thought that was one of Hackman's best performances. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you so much, everybody, for a really interesting and fascinating questions and points that you have raised. Thank you, above all, for those who have contributed to the tip jar. That's gonna, first thing the dogs are gonna do when they wake up tomorrow morning is check the tip jar, and then the next thing is to take out their anger on me. It's always on me. So, but thank you, everyone who's at least trying to keep them a little bit subdued. So we're going to do some more podcasts over the weekend, and then next Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, Peter and I will do our joint live stream, and then next Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, it's going to be my solo. Look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you for today. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. See you soon. All the best. Bye-bye.